Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's webinar, where tonight we will be discussing the suckling reflexes in unborn baby pigs. What? Oh, that's next week. Sorry. Tonight, Mike Jesch will be presenting the seventh in a series of webinars about the venerable GNS 430 and 530 navigators. Tonight, we added an additional moderator, so please welcome Melissa Fowler, and she'll be helping us attempt to answer all the questions posted in the Q&A. We're not necessarily going to monitor the chat, but we'll do our best and participate when we can. If you get it in the Q&A question for us, we're more likely to answer it. If we don't get to your question in the Q&A tonight, then it will be addressed in a follow-up email. Tonight, Captain Mike will teach us how to use the Vnav function of the GNS 430 and 530. Mike is a two-time master instructor and is the 2021 Western Pacific Region Fast Team Representative of the Year. He has over 25,000 hours of flying time. That includes a lot of flight instructing in GA airplanes, flying all around Southern California in his Cessna 182, where he's been using the Garmin 530 for over 10 years. And he's got this thing figured out. As a side job, he flies the Boeing Dreamliner for a major US airline. So Mike, welcome back.
Hey, Brian, thanks. Where have you been? I haven't seen you for a little while.
I've been all over the place, up and down, and just moved to another state. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been a busy year, I know, for you and for me both. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to mention here to everybody tonight. We're a little bit later than our normal cadence has been. Just life goes on. We've been kind of busy doing stuff. So we finally put together a night here that we're able to get together and talk some more about navigators here. So yeah, let's get cranking.
Yeah, and I think this is a good topic. I know that when I teach students how to fly, both private and instrument, one of the things that if an instructor forgets to point out is you're going to be cruising along at your cruising altitude, and all of a sudden the airport's coming up and you're like, oh, I forgot to tell them when to start down.
Was I supposed to land there?
Yeah, there's your airport. We're at cruise altitude. So if only there was a device that could tell us when and help us figure out exactly when to start down. And there's probably about as many ways of determining that point as there are flight instructors.
Yeah, my favorite way used to be that I'd think about, okay, I'm cruising here at, let's say, 9,500 feet. I'm going to go down to this airport that has a pattern altitude of 1,000 feet, let's say. So I got to take off my shoes and socks and do some public math here and think, okay, 9,500 down to 1,000, that's 8,500 feet. That's, if I descend at 500 feet a minute, help me out here, Brian.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, 17 minutes, right?
It's how many 500s are in there?
That's I think it's about 17 or so now.
Yeah.
So how do I know how far that is? And it's a constant mental math thing. And how have you ever used the rule of threes for that?
I have used the rule of threes, and the way I descend an airplane, sometimes it doesn't work. But yeah, 3 miles for every 1,000 feet of altitude. So if you're 5,000 feet from an airport, for example, 5 times 3 is 15 miles. Wait, 3 times 5, 15 miles is a good time to start down for a 3-degree glide slope or descent angle. But how do you know what a 3-degree descent angle is in your Cessna 182?
Yeah, that looks about right. That TLAR method works pretty well. But yeah, it turns out that I use that 3-to-1 in the jets too. It works pretty well. I figure, okay, I got 3,000 feet to lose. It'll times 3 is going to take me about 9 miles. I round up to 10. I better start down about 10 minutes out, something like that. But it's just a wag. It's not very precise. So I
typically do the same thing too, and maybe add a little bit for a tailwind and subtract a little bit for a headwind. But we have some tools that can really help us back us up on that math, right?
Yeah, a little windage. Maybe some people might even call it Kentucky windage. So for tonight here, let's get started on this. We're going to talk about VNAV techniques. That's the predominant subject tonight. I'm going to touch on a few other little things around this as we go along here. So sit tight. We'll get this covered and maybe a few more things too. First, I wanted to point out was, as I've shown in the previous episodes, Brian has a page on his website that is full of resources for this program and hopefully some others coming up soon. You can find links to all the recordings of the previous episodes. You can find link to the simulator that we're using and some other resources that we found along the way. And we try to keep that pretty much up to date. So it's worth making a stop there. And Brian or Melissa, if you would go ahead and post that in the chat box there so that people can just copy and paste it in there.
We'll do it. And I posted it at the top of the chat. So you scroll all the way up, you can see it, but I'll keep posting it from time to time.
Great. Yeah. The problem is the latecomers don't get that one. So the next thing is I mentioned that webpage does have a link directly to the simulator that we're using. And here's the link. And we'll throw that in the chat as well. And there are several versions of this simulator out there. A couple things I'll point out is that this one works, all of them only work in Windows computers. They do not work in Macs. My guess is since the newest version of the simulator is 15 years old, Garmin probably has no interest in updating this to work on more recent versions of Windows or in Mac. The older versions do not work in Windows 10. This particular version does, so that's the good news. The bad news is it only does the WAS-enabled versions of these navigators. So if you happen to have an old non-WAS navigator, there really isn't a simulator for exactly that device, but it gets really close, and it's close enough for our purposes. The other thing I'll point out is the navigation database that comes with this is ancient history. I think Wilbur and Orville were probably just plotting out the airway system, and it didn't exist back then. So this nav database is really old. One of the listeners from an earlier episode did send me a link to download a copy of a newer database, and it turns out you can just plug it right in and play with the navigator. So the database I'm using today is from about 2017. So it's about 10 years newer than the one that comes with the simulator, but it's still pretty old. There's still a lot of old stuff in it, but it's close enough to illustrate what we're doing tonight. The next question I've gotten a lot is, where can I watch the previous episodes? And I've got a YouTube channel. You can click right through to here, and that link will be showing up in the chat here in just a moment. This is all my programs, all sorts of different things show up in this channel. So I've got some stuff on ForeFlight and some other aerodynamics talks that I've given and some other subjects. But if you want to get specifically to the stuff for the GNS series that we've been conducting, this is a playlist that if you click on this link will show you episode 1, and then it will step you through all 6.5 of the previous episodes. So there's another one that one will show up in the link here in just a second. And we'll put it in a link on the YouTube as well. So you can be able to, although if you're watching it on YouTube, you probably already have the playlist. If you do go to my YouTube channel and subscribe, you should get notifications when updates show up. Whenever I put new content on there, you should get a little notification. So that should help. The next thing is we accept contributions. These contributions help pay for the expenses in this large Zoom webinar account that we have. Some of the devices and tools, we got decent cameras and microphones so we can try to give you a better show. And they also help motivate us to do this on our time off and share some of this love for these ancient navigators that we've got. So if you feel like making some contributions, we would gladly accept them. I got a special thanks to a couple of our larger amount contributors here. I'm just listing first names and last initial. I didn't ask permission from any of these people to post them. If you send us a bigger check, the letters get bigger. So if you want a big, you want your name in great big lights, then do what Bruce did. Send us a huge check and we will we'll put your name in lights as well. So one of the other questions I get quite often is, I start up my navigator, and one of the messages I get at the beginning of when it's going through its process is this Fpl Waypoint is locked. What does that mean? And what this means briefly is that the database, there's a flight plan that you have stored in one of your flight plans in the catalog that involves a procedure or a waypoint that is moved or relocated or renamed or deleted in the newer database. So because this flight plan referenced older data and that data has been changed, it gives you this error message. I'll show you how this works here, just a second. Let me crank up my 430. I'm going to start with the 430 simulator tonight. and we turn it on, and it's going to go through its little startup cycle. And yes, I see a question in the chat there. Yes, we are live. If you're here on Thursday evening, the 24th, at about 10 minutes after 4 p.m. Pacific. Oh, that's interesting. This one seems to indicate it's got the old database, which is kind of weird. The 530 simulator is the newer stuff. Here we go. January 2016 is this database. So a little over 6 years old. So that's good enough for our purposes. It's newer than the original, but not today's date. So it goes through this instrument panel self-test. And again, if you're in your airplane, especially if you're flying IFR, and really especially if you are doing an instrument check ride or an IPC, don't just skip past this page. You want to do this self-test and observe it and make sure everything indicates correctly. So the next thing we're going to get is it's going to crank up here, and we see this message light flashing. And anytime that message light is flashing, I suggest that you push that message button and see what it's trying to tell you. And there's our message. Fpl Waypoint is locked. So again, this is telling us we've got an error in one of our flight plans. And the way you find this is we'll press the flight plan button. We'll bring up the active flight plan. We don't care about that one. What we're concerned about here is one of the stored flight plans. So if we scroll down this list of stored flight plans, look at this. We've got one that says it's from Fullerton to locked. So this is one of the offending flight plans that's causing this problem. And if we press the enter key, we'll go into that flight plan and look at it. And what this is telling us basically is the Anaheim 3 departure, which I stored as a SID in this flight plan. I probably did that in the last program or program before that, where we talked about SIDs and stars. I created a flight plan that had this SID in it. And notice it's all locked. Well, let me switch over just a second here to my ForeFlight here on my iPad. And I'll show you what we're talking about here. Sometimes this little switch over takes a little bit of time. If we go over to airports, and I'm interested in the Fullerton Airport is the one that's the problem child here. It should be a little bit clearer screen. If we look at the departures, we see that now the flight plan that was stored in the navigator had the Anaheim 3 departure, but this one only has the Anaheim 1. So this SID has had a couple of revisions. The Anaheim 3 departure is no longer current, and that's why we're getting this error message. So the solution to it is you can pick a different procedure. You can delete the flight plan. You go into this flight plan, modify it, delete that one, and then you'd have to activate it and then select a new SID and then save that one. So that's how you get around that problem. So the next thing I want to talk about now, we're going to get into this altitude, the V-Nav in a departure procedure. So what I thought we'd do is actually, let me flip back over to my navigator here for a moment, because one of the things about there's a difference in the way the 430 and the 530 get to the V-Nav page. You'll notice on the bottom of our navigator here, we only have 4 buttons. On the 530, we have 5 buttons. So I can switch over back to this screen here. I'll show you. Here's a screenshot of the V-Nav display on the 530. And you can see on the 530, we have this V-Nav button on here, which doesn't exist on the 430. So to get into the V-Nav mode, you just push the V-Nav button. It brings up the V-Nav menu. You push it again, you go back to whatever chapter or book you were in before. Usually it's a nav page. On the 430, by contrast, we only have 5 buttons at the bottom. To get to the V-Nav page here, you want to get yourself onto a nav page, nav chapter or nav book. You can do that just by pressing and holding the clear button. It'll take you back to nav page 2. And then if you spin your little right knob all the way over to the right, you get to the last nav page. See this row of little rectangles here, and the last one is colored in. The last page is your vertical navigation. So that's the slight difference in how to get to this, depending on which navigator you're using. Now, let's go back to my navigator, and we are on the 530. We're looking at this flight plan. I'm going to push the flight plan button again. We get back to the nav chapter. So if we want to look at the V-Nav page on this navigator, we're going to go all the way over to the right, and here's our vertical navigation page. Now, to get back to the page we were on, we're still in this nav chapter, nav book. So you can spin the little knob over to page 2 is the default nav page, normally where you end up. Here's page 1 on the 430. So once we've checked this out and we've explored how to get to the VNav page, the function of the VNav page is identical between the two units. So I'm going to start out with the 430 here a little bit. I know in the last few presentations, most of our attendees, most of you are flying with the 430. And I tend to spend most of my time on the 530 just because the screen is a little bit bigger on that. So we'll show the 430 people a little bit of love here. So I've taken the liberty of saving a flight plan. It's going to be in catalog number 8. So we come over to the flight plan catalog, which is page 2 of the flight plans. Give myself a cursor, pushing the cursor button, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of this. Flight plan number 8 is a flight plan that I created from the Orange County Airport out to the Blythe Airport. And you'll see why I picked this one in just a moment. To activate this flight plan, we talked about this, I believe, back in episode 3 or maybe 4, dealing with flight plans. There's a couple of ways to do it, but as long as that's the one that's flashing and highlighted here, you can press the menu key, and the top item in this context-sensitive menu that pops up there is Activate Flight Plan. So tap that. Now it goes into our active flight plan. That's flight plan page 1. And you can see here we're going to be departing off of runway 2. We're going to go to El Toro and a whole bunch of other fixes. So before we go any further, I do want to take just a moment and review back on my ForeFlight here, what this procedure looks like. And I know it just takes a couple of seconds to get this going. If we make our flight plan and we type in here SNA to Blythe, and there's a couple of ways to add this procedure as always. We can just tap on the procedure button up here. We want to look at the departures from SNA, and for today's flight, I'm going to pick the El Toro 4 departure. So that's what it's going to look like. And you can see it's got 3 different transitions, Oceanside, Thermal, and Imperial. Thermal is right about exactly on our route of flight today. So I'm going to pick the thermal transition and add to route, and that will now show up in our route. And we're looking at the Jeppesen version of this plate. And I want to explore this in just a little bit more detail, which I really recommend anytime you are going to fly one of these procedures. It's not enough just to select it from the database on the 430 or 530. You really have to look at the paper to make sure you're going to get it right. The 430 and 530 do a fairly poor job of depicting the routing of this procedure. And if you fly what it shows you, you will get a pilot deviation, and don't come to me because I warned you. So we want to look in the Orange County Airport in the departures, this El Toro 4 procedure. Actually, that was the Jeppesen version. I want to start out with the government version of the El Toro 4, and you'll probably see why here in just a minute. So here's the procedure. It is a little tricky to see because there's all these lines, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense in here. And I'm going to turn on my Bluetooth mouse here, which will make things a little bit more visible. So the airport's over here. We're going to fly this runway heading here basically to this radial, and then we're going to make a turn to this station of the El Toro VOR, and then we're going to navigate outbound on this radial to this intersection, and then we're going to navigate on this radial from Catalina out to here and on our way. The first thing I want to point out here is we have a crossing restriction here. We're supposed to cross ZNAP at or above 12,000 feet. So this is probably not something you're going to fly in a 150 or a 172, Piper 140. But if you're flying a 182 or a 210 or something like that, you could get this departure. And anything, the procedure is the same, no matter which airplane you're flying to get this all set up. So we do have a NOTAM on this, so I always suggest that we look at the NOTAMs and see what we got. This says the Imperial transition or the thermal transition, and that's the one we're on. We want to fly that thermal transition. Distance measuring equipment required, except for aircraft equipped with suitable RNAV system with GPS. The Riverside VOR is out of service. So the good news is we're flying with a WAAS-enabled GPS. So this is an approved GPS, even though the Riverside VOR is inoperative, we can still identify this fix. So we're good to go. We can fly this departure. So that's what the procedure looks like. Now we're going to take a look at how do we enter this into our navigator. And let me share this navigator back again. All right, so as always, there's a couple different ways to do this. You can tap the procedure button. We're going to scroll down here to the select departure and press enter. We're going to pick this El Toro 4 departure, and that's the reason I picked this one. All these other procedures have been changed in database updates since 2016. The El Toro 4 is still the same. So we happen to get away with cheating a little bit using an older database, use a procedure that hasn't been changed. So we want to do the thermal transition. So we review this again, departing SNA, the El Toro 4 from runway 2 left. This particular procedure only works off of runway 2 left. So if we're departing runway 20 right, we would pick a different procedure. And we want the thermal transition. Does that look good to you? You like that one? Yeah, I like that one. Execute that one. So you press enter and it's loaded it into the flight plan. Press the flight plan key and we come back out to the map and we can see we got some pink lines and some white lines on the procedure here. We can scroll over here a little bit, give ourselves a cursor, and we'll move over here as we've shown in previous programs. You can see the whole route and we're good to go. That is how you add the procedure. Now, what we came here really to talk about today is this Vnav feature though. So let's take a look at that. We're on the nav chapter. We want to move from page 2 over to that last page. So we're going to click that little knob all the way over to the right. We get to our vertical navigation page. And we have to enter that fix in there. So we give ourselves a cursor, press that little right-hand push cursor button, and you see the flashing starts there. And we wanted to cross an altitude of 12,000 feet. So we enter that, and that's going to be MSL. And we're going to scroll down here. We want this to be before a waypoint that was called Vnav. So we're going to scroll up to Vnav. And we're going to put in a vertical speed profile of 500 feet a minute. And most unpressurized airplanes, that's a great rate to use. You're not going to blow anybody's ears out too much with a nice general descent like that. So you can plug that in there and we're good to go. The Vnav is programmed. So we get rid of our cursor and we can come back over here to page 1. And if we put our airplane in motion here, we'll fly a nice stately 115 knots. Speed will pick up a little bit here and it's going to navigate us directly to the El Toro VOR. And now that we're moving and we have some altitude in here, we come back over here to the Vnav page and it's telling us we need to climb at least this speed, this climb rate in order to satisfy that requirement. So this Vnav does work both in climbs and descents, although most people I think tend to think of it in terms of a descent rate, which is where most of us are concerned in our little planes on our cross-country trips. We pick up the speed now. We can see that the vertical speed required increases. Oops, actually notice that it went back to Blythe here. So I find that sometimes it doesn't always seem to come up with the fix that I want. So just double check that. It wasn't the speed I was expecting here. Let's make sure it's right. So now it's telling us we've got to climb at 2,000 feet a minute in order to make that climb restriction. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do that in most of our little airplanes. So we'll dial our speed back to a more normal kind of a rate. And if we click our altitude here and tell it we're climbing, it will constantly adjust that vertical speed required value to match the delta between our current altitude and the altitude that we've told it we want to navigate to and our ground speed. All these things will come into play and it will calculate that and tell you the rate that you're going to need to do, constantly being updated. So one of the reasons this is important is, like in my airplane, I'll be cruising along normally about 130 knots, 140 knots indicated airspeed. When I start down, I leave full power in there, so I pick up speed. So that's going to affect this. It's going to change the climb rate or the descent rate that I need, and it's going to constantly keep that in mind. So let me go ahead and put this up here at 12,000 feet so it gets satisfied. And I'll pick up the speed a little bit. So it's just constantly adjusting that to match what we're actually doing. And if we go back to our nav page here, back to page 1, Here's page 2, actually. So now we're crossing the VOR. We're at 11,000 feet, give or take. And it's constantly doing its turn. Once we get past the fix, it's going to give us the time to the next fix. And when MAN-B lights up, there we go. So we got 4.5 minutes to get there. Our vertical speed now needs to be 1,700 feet a minute. We're not quite up there. It's not an instantaneous climb here, but we're getting there. Now the same thing works on the descent. And I want to show you this a couple of different ways here. We're starting out sort of with the techniques that an IFR pilot might use to accomplish this on a procedure where ATC gives you a crossing restriction, let's say. And we will take a look at that where the VFR pilot is going to use it is more along the lines of what Brian was talking about when we kicked off here, calculating your descent to your destination. And I know from my own personal experience, I don't remember getting a lot of training on this. Now, granted, I did my private pilot training a long time ago, so I was very young and I've forgotten a lot since then. But if you're constantly doing this mental math, this mental gymnastics, you can let that box do it for you instead. And it'll be just a whole lot easier. You can set it and forget it. It says to set our bug to 097, so that one complaint will stop. And
Mike, is it true that you can only set one fix at a time?
That's a great question. Yes, unfortunately, you can only put one fix with an altitude, either climb or descent in it. Unlike the GTM, the 650, 750, or the Avidyne, you can put in multiple crossing restrictions and it will do a great job for you. The 430, 530, one at a time. Just like you can only do one approach at a time.
Okay, thanks. So it looks like you just, once you get to a fix, then you can put the next altitude change that you'd want for the next fix.
Exactly that. So let's take a look here. Here's Vnav is coming up. We're only a few miles away from Vnav. If I pick the speed up a little bit more, we'll get there a little bit quicker. So once we get past Vnav, we'll adjust it for the descent. And like I say, we're going to be there in just a couple of minutes, so it won't be long. Meanwhile, do we have any other questions on this portion of it? And we've got 8 miles to go to the next fix after this, which at 300 knots, help me out with the math here, Brian. That's what, 4.5 miles a minute, so 2 minutes.
I dropped my calculator.
A minute and 20. All right.
Yeah, I was looking at the questions you asked. There's a couple that I put to answer at the end. I think they're more appropriate.
Okay.
For the end, because it's not quite with the topic we're talking about right now, but I think they're good questions for later.
Okay, good.
There is one question. How would a pilot cross a fix 10 miles south of a VOR, like a certain distance from the VOR radius, I guess?
Yeah, if you were inbound to that, let me slow this down just a little bit here. Take it back off of ludicrous speed. If we go back over to this Vnav page, and assuming that this restriction is at a point before a fix that's on our route of flight, so we're on the way to Vnav. If we wanted to make this descent, let's say at 5 miles before Vnav, you can just come over here and dial in 5 right here, and away you go. I think we're already inside of that. So let's see.
You don't have to be on a specific course to that.
Yeah, you do. It has to be along your route because otherwise it doesn't have a way to calculate it. It doesn't know how you're going to get there. So it doesn't try to do off-track V-Nav navigation at all.
Okay. So if you were getting a vector, for example, then clear direct to that fix, you'd have to put direct to that fix, get a route in there, and then say cross this side or south or north, wherever you are.
Exactly.
At that distance. Okay.
Yep. So let's play with this in the descent now. We're up at 12,000 feet. Yeah, see, I put the altitude in the lower corner of my nav page 1. So we are at 12,000 feet in our simulator here. We're coming up on Vnav. Let's set a descent profiling here. Let's say that we want to cross some fix, let's say 7,000 feet, okay? And we want to cross right at the fix. So let's set this back to 0, and I'll take the distance before in just a moment. So now we want another fix after Vnav. Let's say Takey here. And we type that in. Notice again, sometimes I've found this today when I was playing with this in earnest, trying to get this to where it will actually let me select one of the other fixes. And it doesn't always do that. And I'm not sure why. I tried reading the manual. Don't tell anybody, but I did actually read the manual and I couldn't figure it out. So now we have another turn point coming up here. Let me navigate this turn. So maybe somebody smarter than me could go in the chat there and talk about how they make it work. But I haven't always been able to make it work. So it's been a little frustrating to me.
Another question is, would a GPS equipped with autopilot, a GPS V equipped autopilot, communicate with the 430 on departure? So I guess would the autopilot communicate with the 430 on this vertical nav?
I have not seen one that does. I've seen some that tried with a GTN, but I haven't seen a 430 or 530 that can tell the autopilot to make that restriction. And there's a couple of dangers in there. I mean, if it's telling you that you need to maintain a 2,000 foot a minute climb rate for that fix, you're not going to be able to do that in most of our small single engine airplanes. So it probably won't do it. And if it was going to try too hard to do that, then the autopilot could conceivably end up driving you into a stall, and nobody wants that. So
okay, and I see in the chat, Rob Young's asking, does it have to be the next fix, or can you put any fix down line with a vertical nav?
Certainly the next fix works. I have had it work with the destination. We'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
But here in this case, I picked the next fix and I said 7,000 feet at Pune intersection, and it's telling me, look at this, almost a 5,000 foot a minute descent. So it's pretty close, and we've got a pretty severe descent here we've got to make. It's only in 2 miles, so clearly we're not going to be able to do that. So now that we've got that next fix in there, let's see if we can put in the fix after that. So put takey in there. Now takey works okay, and now we have to do a 429 foot a minute descent. And just for kicks, I'm going to tell it that I want to do this 10 miles after takey. So that's going to give us a shorter descent, a shallower descent. Okay, so it's telling us we need 300 feet per minute. If we were to start down right now, 300 feet per minute will make that descent. Now on the 530, I'll show you that just a couple minutes here. It's about time to switch over. There's a little bit more real estate on this screen. So the 530 can give you some more information there, and it will tell you begin descent in so many minutes and seconds. So that's kind of handy too.
And Mike, we did get a good question that I think is valid. That the MSL in the GPS altitude, is it going to vary from your indicated altitude on your altimeter? And if you're far off your temperature and pressure from standard, is that something a pilot needs to be aware of?
That's absolutely true. Because this 530 is not connected into your barometric altimeter, it doesn't know what your actual indicated altitude is. The only thing it knows is the GPS altitude, which if you're at 2,000 or 3,000 feet, it's probably not that much. And so we got a message light flashing here, approaching VNav profile. So here's your heads up. It's telling us that we need to start down here pretty soon. I'll get back to your question here in just a moment. So here, the vertical speed required is now 550 feet a minute. And we told it we wanted to descend at 500 feet a minute. So it's telling us, hey, time to start down. So if air traffic control hasn't given you the descent clearance yet, you need to be asking them for it. So back to the GPS altitude, because it only knows GPS altitude, which may or may not be the same as the barometric altitude, and the barometric altitude is the one you care about as a pilot. So this is not precise, nothing like an exact science. It'll get you in the neighborhood, and that TLAR thing, that looks about right, is pretty close. So my technique is I usually will start my descent when this vertical speed required shows about 450 feet a minute, somewhere in that range. And then I start on down and everything will be fine.
So we had a good point, you know, from Sebastian in the chat saying that this equipment does not substitute for a brain. And I think that's very important that we still, you know, when we engage the Garmin 430, we don't disengage the brain. And if you're in cruise flight and you know you're cruising at, say, 4,500 feet indicated, but your GPS altitude says 5,000 feet, then you know it's warmer than standard. Typically in the summer, you'll see that. If it's colder than standard, you'll see your GPS altitude lower than your indicated altitude. And then you can compensate this VNav for knowing that your GPS altitude is a little bit off. So good points brought up by our viewers.
Yeah, those are excellent. Thanks so much for asking them. I love that. Don't disengage the brain just because you engage the autopilot. And I'm pretty sure Brian will agree with me completely. That's a good rule of thumb just in general. We don't want to become too much of a child of the magenta line. So this is kind of in the IFR context where we might use it to give us a little leg up when we're planning or working to achieve a descent clearance that ATC has offered. The place where I like to use it a lot, I think I saw some comment about using it for the airport. And this is one of my favorite ways, and pretty much the primary way that I use this. You have to do this in a particular order because notice that I have MSL as my target altitude standard here, and my target position is a waypoint. So it's not an airport. It doesn't know how high that airport is. Takey is at all altitudes, all elevations. So that doesn't translate to MSL. So what I'm going to work on here is I'm going to tell it that I want to reference my Vnav plan based on the destination airport. And so I set that. Now I can come up here and I can adjust my altitude. I'm going to tell it that I want to arrive at this fix 1,000 feet above the waypoint. And I want to get there 5 miles before the airport. So in this way, most airports have a traffic pattern altitude of about 1,000 feet. So it knows how high the airport is. It knows how high 1,000 feet above that is. It knows how high we are. And it says, okay, at our current speed of this 202 knots here, if we were to start our descent right now from 9,000 feet, we would need to descend at 230 feet per minute to achieve that. And I pick a little bit before. Don't just pick 0 above the airport, because now you haven't given yourself any room to fly the traffic pattern. You haven't given yourself any room to slow down the airplane a little bit, maybe put the landing gear down, configure the flaps and so forth. So if I set it up to be 1,000 feet, 5 miles before the airport, earlier Brian and I talked about the 3 to 1 rule. So 1,000 feet will take 3 miles. So that's my baseline. And I back that up 2 additional miles. That gives me the room to level off, slow down, configure the airplane, do my before landing checklist, and everything's all good. So we can get rid of our cursor and we can go about our business and just basically forget it. We're just passing Hemet here, so we have a long way to go. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the speed here. We're going to go supersonic, and I'll do 600 knots here. Now watch this. As we pick up the speed, that's the only parameter we've changed. We can see our vertical speed required is increasing. And actually, I want to slow down a little bit. I want this to kind of gradually creep up on 500 feet a minute. We'll do about 300 knots. Go 350, and we'll see. So normally we'd be flying along in our page over here in our nav pages. We're just coming up on this next fix. We'd be minding our own business. We got our message here that we know about. It's telling us you can't use this for navigation. And you can come over here and pop over to the VNav page and monitor it anytime you want. But you can also just leave it here and fly along and enjoy the view. Hopefully, as we go by Palm Springs here, it doesn't get too bumpy. It's frequently very bumpy in that pass. So we'll see pretty soon, we're going to get a message pop up. The same message we saw just a couple of moments ago. And we're going to see our message light flashing. And it's going to tell us it's time to start down. At least it should. So, yeah, I see Scott's asking a question there in the chat about the link to the simulator. That's on the GNS 101 site there. Brian will take care of you in just a minute. I see a question there about the nav data card going bad during a flight. Yes, that happened to a friend of mine. Back on the East Coast, his nav data card quit. And the 530 he was using turned basically into a doorstop at that point. And it was shortly after that I bought another data card for mine. So I alternate data cards. I always have an old version of the data. So at least I got something. If the current one quits, I can flip back at least to old data and I'll have something in there. Oh, hey, Justin. I see Justin has checked in with us. So here's our message light flashing. That's the navigator trying to tell us something. It says set course to 084. I didn't do that. Okay, I'll do that and make it happy. And is it going to make a liar out of me and not show me the descent? Oh, it's still coming up. So we got just a couple of minutes. I will pick up the speed just shy of 400 knots and try to trigger that descent warning. So, you know, you're enjoying the view, and this thing is doing its calculations for you, and it's going to give you a heads up that it's time to start down pretty soon.
And it's using present ground speed. Is that correct? It has no way to forecast your speed in a descent.
That's exactly right. The present ground speed, present altitude, as it understands it through the GPS system, the current conditions as it knows it. So even if you turned around, it wouldn't know what to do with that if you're going the wrong direction. Looks like it needs to be the next waypoint. Well, it's navigating off of this one. Yeah, see, I think what happened was we already started down. It triggered the descent logic on it at one point. So maybe if we climb up a little bit, maybe it'll switch back. But this is normally the setting that I leave my 530 set up for in the Vnav, is to set up 1,000 feet, 5 miles before, maybe a little bit more, and it will do that for me. So I'm going to stop this share, and I'm going to switch over to GPS here, to the 530. Maybe I can tackle another question while this thing's cycling over.
Okay, earlier Harold had asked in the Garmin 530, once you've loaded and activated the GPS approach, how can you cancel the approach in the 530 and return to navigating directly to the airport?
The easiest way to do that is probably going to be just go direct to the nearest airport. Yeah, so for instance, you were anticipating doing an instrument approach, and now they cleared you for the visual approach. Just at that point, I'd give up on the 530 and just use my eyeballs and navigate. But you could make it go direct to the missed approach waypoint. You could go direct to the nearest airport. A whole bunch of other ways you can do that. No matter what you do, if you go direct to any other fix, it's going to take it out of the approach navigation mode and into terminal mode, where you have 1 mile lateral deviation.
So I guess, like, if you were going, you got overzealous and you put in, you're on a route that you're following and you entered the approach and hadn't activated it yet, but then all of a sudden you're still a couple hundred miles out and ATC says clear direct destination.
Yeah, I've had that happen. And usually when they do that, I'll ask them if I can go instead direct to the initial approach fix.
Because you've already got it there.
And I can tell them the name. I can give them the lat long if I need to. I had that happen once going to Longview, Texas, and we got cleared direct to the airport from, I don't know, maybe 150, 200 miles out. And I just asked him, hey, can I go direct to the IAF instead? Here's how it's spelled, and I'll give you the lat long if you want it. And he said, sure, you can do that. So let me reactivate this. Hopefully that answered that question. We will activate this flight plan. So now, and let me set the position over, oops, I want to go initialize position. I wanted to go to Vnav. The only thing more tedious than typing in a location is trying to spell some fix to reposition it, which of course you can't do this in the airplane. You can't reposition the airplane somewhere. You have to wait for some time to elapse. Okay, and let me activate the correct waypoint here. We're going to go to Vnav, and I'm going to activate that leg. So now we're navigating from Missy to Vnav, and I'll give it a little bit of speed, and I'll give it some altitude. So we're up here at 12,000 feet.
By the way, the Vnav intersection is in Germany. I looked.
Oh, how's that spelled? Vnav is only 4 letters.
VENAV.
Oh, cool. Yeah, if you picked VNAV, that's probably an airport, I'm going to guess, in South Central Asia, but don't quote me on that.
It could be.
So in the 530, now we've got this VNav button, so we can just push the VNav button that takes us direct to this vertical navigation page. And I've told it, now it remembered that I wanted to descend at 500 feet a minute to be 1,000 feet above the waypoint 5 miles before your destination. So it's pretty close, right? It's telling me to begin my descent in 1 hour and 20 minutes. It's counting down rapidly right now because we're still speeding up. Ground speed is 86.5 there. Plus we're climbing. So if I pick up the speed and set the altitude up there, let me see if I go back here. I don't have altitude displayed, GPS altitude displayed on my 530 simulator. So we got our message light is flashing. It says it wants me to set the course 065. I'll set the heading to 065 as well. I'll make the message go away. Push the VNav button. So here it says right now we would start our descent at 200 feet a minute and begin our 500 foot a minute descent in 20 minutes, and we'll get there. So if we turn this VNav off and go back to the regular nav page and go about our business and enjoy the ride, get out the shrimp cocktail appetizer and your soda, whatever. Tell your wife, yeah, we're going to be there in 20 minutes, whether it's 20 minutes or not. Let's see. Can you change the time before descent that the descent warning appears? Yeah, sort of in a manner of speaking. If you were to set a higher descent rate, it would postpone the descent, start you down later. But it really isn't a time before the top of descent, so far as I know. It's based on so many different variables. Okay, so yeah, it says now 288 feet a minute. I'll go ahead and pick it up to 300. We haven't done a descent yet on this thing, so I'm hoping this time you'll see the light flashing. How do you see the GPS altitude on the 430? It's one of these boxes on the right. It works kind of the same way on the 530. If we come over here, you go to menu and we can change fields. And you see this flashing now at the waypoint. So let's say I wanted to change this to maybe this track. I want to change that to something else. I can just twist the little knob here, and here's all the selections of things that I can change that to. Vertical speed required. I could put that vertical speed required on here if I wanted. Maybe you want to see it on your screen here instead of the time to descend. Distance bearing, I don't see it. GPS altitude on here. Ground speed. Some of these you have to kind of read between the lines. Vertical speed. I don't see it on the 530 as a selection. Maybe it's just a 430 thing. I keep the vertical speed required on my ForeFlight display. I don't use that on my 530. So we got our message light flashing again. It says approaching VNav profile. So here's your heads up again. If ATC hasn't issued your descent clearance yet, now would be a good time to start poking them for that. So, and be the pilot. You're in command here. I was doing an instrument flight with a pilot a little while back, and he said, well, how do I know when it's time to start down? Or I asked him the question, how do you know when it's time for you to start down? And his answer was, well, ATC will tell me. I don't recommend that as a way to conduct business here. You are the pilot in command of your flight. You need to be in charge of this. You need to be aware of what your descent requirements are, and you need to ask for your descent from ATC. So it's kind of a last ditch effort. If ATC hasn't given you the descent yet, you need to drive that bus, be the pilot. Okay, so now it says it's in the descend to target status, and it's wanting to go on down. So that is the way I use VNav. Up and down, it'll work for either. Over a waypoint, over the destination. And we've seen how to do these distances before here. A couple little hiccups there. Like I say, I'm not sure. Sometimes I'm not able to select the fix that I want as my target. I'm not sure why. I think I saw an answer flip by there that maybe it only works if it's the next waypoint. I don't think that's the case because I've seen it select other waypoints as well. Obviously, if you're in a faster airplane, you don't mind descending faster, you can put a 1,000 foot a minute or whatever speed you want. The default in here is 400 feet a minute. And if you press the messages button, you can tell it to turn the messages off, and you can tell it to restore defaults. So the default descent rate that it comes programmed with is 400 feet per minute. I just prefer 5 because Now, remember, this is one of the required reports to ATC under IFR is the inability to maintain a climb or descent of more than 500 feet a minute. So I like to target 500, and that's just my technique. What else you got, Brian?
Well, it's not necessarily a VNAV question, but there was a question that asked when loading waypoints into the flight plan page, are there shortcuts available, such as the nearest, as far as waypoints go? I know you can go nearest airport, nearest nav aids. Is there one for airports?
Not
or waypoints
from this page. I've never seen one. I went to, here's what I did is I came to the flight plan, the active flight plan. I gave myself a cursor and I'm flashing on the last box in the flight plan. There really isn't one in here. This is you have a closest point of flight plan. So if you weren't going direct to something, you can add another, you could, if you were going direct to something, you could make it a beam point, basically, as we call them in the big planes, we call it a beam point. You could do this. I've never done that. So no, the short answer is there's no way to do that.
Okay. Is there a way to use your personal waypoint in the flight plan and use a VNAV to the personal waypoint? Like, this is my home or personal waypoint.
Yes.
Use that in the VNAV?
Well, once you make it as a waypoint, then yeah, you could do it in VNAV. Fix for being able to enter Victor Airways other than dollars. No, you can buy a ForeFlight and put a flight stream 210 in your airplane, and and then you can create it on your ForeFlight and put it in there.
Which I think is worth it. I've seen that work great.
Yeah, it works awesome.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk briefly here about user waypoint. So I spent a lot of time on a user waypoint issue recently with an attendee. Let me put this back on ForeFlight. I want to show you a situation where you might consider doing this. Let me get back over to ForeFlight here, and let me clear this flight out and get rid of this map page here. And I'll put up an IFR low altitude, because here's a case where I used to have to do this in the Boeing. Several years ago, I got stuck doing a whole month of red-eye flights to the East Coast, and there was a jet airway directly to another jet airway that didn't have a waypoint there. Let's see if I can get my mouse cursor to work. So you can see a lot of these times, if you're going to transition from one airway to another, there'll be an intersection there. Makes it real easy. You just type in that intersection name, TAFTO, and you can go from whichever Victor 183 here over to Victor 137. But the situation I got was one like this, where I wanted to change from 183 to 107, and there's no intersection there. So in ForeFlight, you can just type in a waypoint here. We would type, this one's coming up from San Marcos, say, RZS, and we're going to end up, make that keyboard go away. The waypoint on the other side is Avenal. So I can type in Avenal there. So now I've got the straight line, which is not what I want, but you can get it very precisely. Insert before here. We're going to insert San Marcos 015 to the Avenal 129. So 015 and 129. So RZS/015/AVE/129. And you can see in ForeFlight now, we've got a real nice pink line right along that airway to that point in space in the middle of nowhere that then joins the other airway up to Avenal. So that's how you do it with ForeFlight. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to do this in the 430 or 530. And if I were to try to send this flight plan to the 530 through a flight stream, it doesn't do that either. It doesn't do user-defined waypoints very easily. So what we have to do instead is we'll come back over to our navigator here, and we can type in San Marcos, our Z. Even using the keyboard to try to type this in is sometimes kind of a pain. Put San Marcos in there, and then we'll put Avenal. I'll do it the same way, and I'll put the anchoring fixes in here first, and then I'll go in and I'll make the user-defined waypoint in the middle. So San Marcos to Avenal. Now I come back up here and I highlight the second waypoint, the one that anchors the end of this leg, and I'll just twist the little knob. And you have to create your waypoint first. I haven't found any other way to do this. So if one of the attendees has a better way to do this, I'm all ears. Send me an email. I create a user-defined waypoint in here, and it has to be a unique name. You can't use a name that's already in the database. So just as a technique, I like to start my user-defined waypoints with the plus sign. I know there is never going to be a waypoint in the database that starts with a plus sign. So I know this is going to be unique, and it doesn't really matter what you call it. So I'm going to call it map 8. So you type that in, and it says that waypoint does not exist. Do you want to create a user waypoint? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. So now it takes you over to this user-defined waypoint page with that name. And do I want to make this waypoint right here? And no, this is not where I want to make it. So I can just take the big knob and I'm going to move the cursor up to this fix. And I'm going to type in Avenal. I'm sorry, I wanted to type in San Marcos first. RZS. Oop, I went a long way around this time. See, you can go both ways. RZS. And enter. We said it was the 015 radial. So we just come over here and twist the little knob, and we're going to type in 015. You can probably figure out where I'm going now. The next fix is going to be Avenal. This is a whole lot easier in the GTN where you can just type it in, or an IFD. So Avenine, and it was there, I'm sorry, Avenal, and it was the 129. So we can spin in 129. And is that the point? Now it calculates the latitude, longitude of that location. So you can see here, you can probably guess there's 3 different ways to enter this waypoint. You can either use a single waypoint and a radial and a distance, or you can use the first waypoint and a radial, and then a second waypoint and a radial, or you can type in a latitude, longitude. So however you decide to do it, take the big knob down to create here. We're going to create that waypoint. And now you can see it's put it in our flight plan right between those 2 waypoints, right where we wanted it to be. So that's about 34 miles to that intersection. And then it's 46 miles up to the second waypoint. So that's how you do a couple of different ways to do user-defined waypoints. And here, I'll tell you what, let me, I'll get this thing going directly to San Marcos. So waypoint direct, enter, take us direct there. Once we get turned around, I'll pick up the speed here and we'll go Mach 3 with our hair on fire.
And Mark Mullins posted this little tip: get the lat long from ForeFlight and then enter the lat long for your user waypoint. It's another way to
You can do that too. For me, that lat long is a little more tedious and it's rife with errors. First time I went into Oshkosh and did the mass arrival in my Cessna group, I typed in my lat long for several waypoints and I switched some digits and I didn't catch it. So if you're going to use lat long, which you certainly can, just be super careful and maybe let somebody else look at it and make sure you got the right fixes on that. Oops. So come on, we're going rocket speed over there, and that's going to be a little while. We probably don't want to fly all the way there. But if we come over here to nav page 2 and we give ourselves a cursor, we can scroll up there. We can zoom out a little bit. And you'll see, here, I can move my cursor over here a bit more and move it up and then zoom in on that cursor location. And we can see that here's the San Marcos and then that intersection that I built in that one, and it looks about right. And I would compare the course and distance that the navigator came up with in the flight plan page with what ForeFlight or what you could see on your chart that you're looking at. Now, the next thing with these user-defined waypoints, if you do this a few times, you'll start to get a whole bunch of user waypoints in here. Sometimes it's a little tedious to figure it out. So let's go look at a page that we haven't looked at very much here. We've spent a lot of time on the Nav chapter, Nav book. I call it chapter, Garmin calls it a book. You go instead over to the waypoint here. Remember, this shows you all sorts of information on airports. You can see the runways, the frequencies, and so forth. We've touched on this a little bit in an earlier program. But the last page here is the user-defined waypoint page. And if you press menu from this page, you can view the entire list of all your user-defined waypoints. So you can check this out. You can go enter that waypoint. It tells you where it is. So this is the Blythe 261 at 17 miles, where it crosses the thermal 077. Whatever you want to do. If you want to delete a waypoint, then you come over to this page, you highlight the one you don't want anymore, you press clear, and it says it's not currently used in any flight plans. Do you want to delete that? Sure. We'll come over here to this map 8 one that I just made. If I try to delete that one, it says it is a flight plan waypoint. So it's cautioning you, if you delete this, you could have a flight plan that's changed, and it wants to make sure you're aware of that. So from here, I would just get rid of that cursor and don't take a chance at having that one go away.
There's no pointer on the GNS 530, is there, from which you could put an arrow on the screen and create a waypoint like right here?
Yes, kind of.
You can. Okay.
On the 530 and 430 both, it's going to be on Nav on page 2. So let's say we want to make a manual waypoint over here. Just give yourself a cursor, and we'll scroll this over here. You can point this pointer wherever you want it. Let's put one up here somewhere. Up here, press enter, and it says, here's the user-defined waypoint. Here's the latitude, longitude, fixed radial distance, whatever. Create that. So now you've got this waypoint is called 001. And see, yeah, you want to go direct that waypoint? Sure, let's go direct that waypoint.
Nice. And so the big knob, little knob is what's moving it laterally and horizontally.
Exactly. The okay. Big knob moves left to right, and the little knob moves up and down.
Well, I didn't know that. I just learned that.
Oh, there you go. See, stick around, Brian. I'll teach you a couple of things.
More than a couple.
This is kind of interesting, though. Remember, we were navigating this thing directly to San Marcos, and now we created this user-defined waypoint there. And so our pink line ends at that waypoint, and it doesn't go anywhere else. We look back at our flight plan, it's not in there. So this was part of a discussion I was having with another instructor the other day, is there is quite a difference between going direct to a waypoint, just randomly pushing the direct button, versus executing a flight plan. One of the differences is, if you're just going direct to a thing, VNav isn't going to work for your descent thing. You notice it's changed everything. Now it went 1,000 MSL 4 miles before that fix. The 530 manually actually says that the vertical nav doesn't work if you're just going direct to a waypoint. So you have to really, to get the full benefit of the VNav feature, you need to have a flight plan programmed in there. So now we've got this message light, we've gotten to our waypoint, and there's no more flight plan after that. So set course to 306. I'm not sure, that's probably the course we were flying before we got there. And we come here, yep, 306, that's about the course we were on. So if we want to resume back to the flight plan we were flying, whoops, got some terrain here, 11,200 feet, I'm going to hit some terrain, really? Let's look over here at our terrain page. Yeah, look at that, we got a mountain coming up. So I guess I better climb a little bit more. I'll go up to 14,000 feet. It'll dodge everything at 14,000 feet. So good thing I had that warning turned on, or I would have hit that mountain, wouldn't I? So come to the flight plan, we come back down here, and we can pick one of these fixes and go direct to that one, and away we go. All right, so Sam is asking about how to mark a point I just flew over to return to later. Same thing, you can pull up the nav page 2, just press the cursor button and press enter, and it'll take the point that you were just over and make a new user waypoint out of that. So if you create this, now I've got user waypoint 0002, and that's stored in our database. And if we look over here at our waypoint last page, there's that waypoint. So that's how you do that. That was easy. Give me a tough one. I set a VNAV profile in a flight plan. Save the flight plan. Does it save that VNAV profile? I believe, I'm not certain of this, I'm kind of flying off the cuff here a little bit. The VNAV is a completely separate feature from the flight plan. So if you set up a VNAV that's a part of a flight plan and then you change it or activate a different flight plan, they're not going to be saved from one to the other. So you basically have to redo VNAV every time. And that's, again, is a little bit different to the GTNs or the IFDs or even a G1000. It will save it as part of the flight plan, and each fix will have the altitudes in there. Okay, it's complaining about all that. Let me come back over to the nav page, and here we are.
In the chat, we have a question about user-defined waypoint for a non-published hold. Can you use OBS mode on that user-defined waypoint to hold on that fix?
Yes, you can. We covered this in some detail a couple of programs ago on an episode about holding. I didn't specifically address, though, sometimes you could get ATC that says, hey, hold present position. I don't know about Brian, but I hate getting a clearance like that. But same thing, you come over here to nav page 2, give yourself a cursor, press enter, make this waypoint, waypoint 3. We can go direct to that waypoint, direct enter, enter, and now just put it in OBS mode, and we can put our leg on here to hold whichever way we want to hold. And the 530 and therefore the autopilot it's connected to will not navigate that hold for you. So you're going to have to manually do this yourself. So I talked a little bit about how to do that. You can use the heading bug, heading select to navigate it around the holding pattern. Make sure your autopilot is in heading mode and your heading mode is active. You're going to have to manually fly it. But when we get displaced a little bit here from this leg, you'll see if I make a right turn and want to re-intercept that leg on the way in, let's see, I've got the 210. I actually want to hold southeast of it. I'm on the holding side of this right now. So I'm going to flip this over and put the tail over there. So the pink line is over there. If you set your heading bug kind of on an intercept, maybe a 45-degree angle toward that course that you want to hold on, I don't want to be doing 600 knots here either. So I guess I could.
I think that's above the aim limit.
I think so. Yeah. And I'm less than 3 minutes from the fix. So I'm expected to slow down now.
Yeah, I'm going to paste the link again right now to the playlist because there is a holding webinar that we did and Mike talks about in more detail.
Yeah. Excellent. So once you get established on this inbound course here, you can put the autopilot back in nav mode and it will fly an intercept onto that. So you can intercept the holding leg, but you can't do the rest of the hold. Any of the turns or timing or anything else is going to be manually accomplished. So hopefully that does that. Mark's asking about, why don't you just use ForeFlight for the hold? Yeah, that'll draw you a nice picture, but you can't use that for primary navigation. The autopilot is not going to fly the hold. So you can use the heading bug and fly that around. That's not a bad way to do it as a secondary reference.
I like Arthur's question.
Yeah, there is a good one. I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not very familiar with the MX-20. I've used one just a couple of times and its cousin, the MX-200. So I'm not sure.
And he asked if he could transfer saved waypoint data from one GPS to another is what the question was. And like the MX-20 to the 530, is there a way to go from any other GPS to the 530 to get your user waypoints transferred?
I'm not even sure you can do 530 to another 530 installed in the same airplane. I'm not sure. And I don't fly a lot of dual 430s or 530 operations, so I don't have a good reference for you. My hunch is probably not. I know that I can't transfer one from my ForeFlight into the 530. So I'm highly skeptical that I could do it from a 530 to a 430.
Even with a flight stream, you can't do it? If it's part of a flight plan, maybe?
Nope.
Interesting.
Believe me, I've tried. I wish.
We're at the little over the hour mark. Do you want to end the official part and then hang around for some more Q&A?
I can do that. Yeah, that is all that I had to talk about here today. Let me go back over to my slides here and we'll finish. Don't stop recording yet. Let me go back to my screen one here and I'll go back to my presentation. So we talked about the ForeFlight for the charts. So here's my email and Brian has posted that in the chat. I saw it a little bit ago. Same as it ever was. I prefer that the emails with questions about how to use your GPS come to this email. And I'll be honest, sometimes it's a couple of days before I can get back to you, but I will. And it helps me keep the GPS focused questions separate from all the other emails I get. So if you want wings credit for tonight, we can do that. If you're watching this live on Thursday evening, it's now about 10 minutes after 5 Pacific Daylight Time. You don't have to do anything. We will take care of the credits for you. You'll get it. You don't have to do anything. You should get that in a couple of days. I'm going off to training tomorrow. I'll be back on Saturday. So I probably won't get to it until Saturday.
Several people posted their email address in the chat. And if you've done that, if it's the same email with which you registered for this event, this webinar, then you will get the wings credit. If you have a different email address, then follow this screen.
So I see Jer. Hey, Jer, he's one of my favorite people. Talks about you can, he says, cancel a 5:30 to 5:30 as a sync. I think he means transfer. So I'd like to try that. I need to find somebody with 2 5:30s or a 5:30, 4:30. So anyway, back to the wings credit. If you're watching later, the recording on the YouTube channel or anywhere else, send an email to this email address with this in the subject line. I like getting the screenshots, but it really makes it a whole lot easier for me if you put it in the subject line of the email that you send me, and I will take care of that. It's a lot easier there. You get it a lot quicker than including it in the chat message here. So more resources. There is the link to Brian's web page on this series. He's posted that in a chat a couple of times, but if you're watching online, make sure that the GNS is in lowercase letters. We found early on the uppercase is incorrect. It won't work. And here's my YouTube channel. It has, again, all my YouTube content is on there. I don't do a lot here, so you're not going to get inundated. But if you do subscribe to the channel, you'll get a notice when new stuff comes out, and you won't miss anything that way. And again, contributions, Brian and I love them and give us some good motivation to go out and keep doing this and other stuff. We've got a couple things in mind, in particular, probably 2 more in this series on the GNS navigators. The final one, we're going to sift back through the chat and the Q&A for all the programs we've done and collate a bunch of common questions and answers. I've touched on a little bit of them here and now and then. But I want to go back and circle around to all of them and make sure we try to answer as many as we possibly can. We're also contemplating doing a series on the GTN navigators. Brian and I both are using a lot of GTNs lately. So we're starting to
I would plan on looking for that sometime around this summer, or maybe even a little sooner, late spring. We'll start working on the GTN stuff.
Yeah, whenever we get some spare time, right?
Exactly. On the 1st of February.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was the 31st of February.
Yeah.
And the last thing is, I'd like to say thanks to my lovely wife, Beth. Today is actually our 32nd wedding anniversary. And here I am upstairs doing a program, and she's out taking care of the house for us. So 32 years of wedded bliss here. She loves flying in our little airplane. We just went up to Monterey for the weekend and I had a very nice time. And I'd do it all again if I could.
Happy anniversary. That's 32 years of putting up with you. She's a rock star.
Yeah, exactly. And she got a real introduction to it. We had just picked the day we were going to get married, and I got mandatory assigned to first officer upgrade training at the airline. And the training program was right over the date that we picked to get married. So she's been used to nothing from the company for a long time. And then 2 years ago, our 30th wedding anniversary, I was 2 days into training on the 787. So it's just, we can't get a break, but it's convenient to be able to celebrate these things on other times and days. And she's got a tremendous amount of patience to put up with my shenanigans, least of all is this. So thanks, Beth. I love you, dear. Talk to you later. And so that's the official part of the presentation for tonight, Brian.
Excellent. Well, that was good. I even learned a few things. It's as always. So thank you very much for putting that together and presenting it. And thank you everybody for attending. We'll hang around for a few minutes. If there's any Q&A you want to talk about, this is the official portion has ended, and now the unofficial fun part may begin.
Exactly. No rules.
Yeah, there are some questions in the that I left in the Q&A. If you want to take a
Okay.
look at those, there's a happy anniversary from Sean, and there's a lot of happy anniversaries in the chat as well.
Okay, I see one about the 430 driving a G3X G5 GSC 500. Upgrade on a 185. That's a lot of navigation in a 185. I've got a little bit of 185 time and did my tail wheel endorsement in there. Melissa's a more tail wheel expert than I am. But I have flown a little bit with G5s from a 430, a 530, and GTNs, and it works great. They're awesome units. I'm looking at putting in a pair of GI 275s, probably in mine, and probably hooking it up to a GFC 500. They work great. As long as you've got GPSS steering available somewhere. One of my clients has an Aspen that generates GPSS. I believe the GI 275, the G5 will create GPSS steering commands. It's awesome. You tell it how you like your eggs for breakfast in the morning. It'll fix your breakfast too.
I can't wait to get these toys.
Yeah, you'll get more mileage out of the GTN. You get some better Vnav capability like we've been talking about. You can do holding patterns. You can do Victor Airways, Jet Airways.
None of which I need in my Centauri, but it's nice to have.
Exactly. But there's some features the 430 and 530 have that the GTN doesn't. I have not found a checklist feature in the GTNs, and I use the electronic checklist in my GNS 530 and my 182. I love it. So
how do you get to the part that you don't have your battery on yet for starting engines? And
yeah, and I don't put the before start checklist in there. I have the after start, the before takeoff, the after takeoff checklist. Those sorts of checklists are in there.
Important safety tip.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Now, if you have several waypoints in your flight plan, when navigating to a waypoint, I display ETA, which gives you ETA to that next waypoint. ETA to your destination. That's an excellent question, and I have an answer for you on that one. Go back to the 530. Fortunately, I didn't close that down. I just have to find it. Here we go. You can, I mentioned a little moment ago about changing these fields. You go to menu, and we're going to change fields. And then we can select which field we want to use. So let's say we want to put this in the ground speed column down there. So use the big knob to highlight the bottom box here. And then little knob, one click will bring up this menu. And you can click up here to your, you've got ETA, and then I think you've also got an ET destination. Well, you get to pick what, if what you want to see is one of the things in this list, then you can see it. If not, you see it on ForeFlight. So I change my fields quite often, but I try not to get too much duplication between ForeFlight and the 530. Some duplication is inevitable sometimes, I think, but I just put like the vertical speed required or descent to destination, I put in ForeFlight. I don't bother with that in the 530. Some other things like that. So they are somewhat customizable. And let's see if we get rid of our cursor. Let me look. Maybe we can set one of these fields on the nav page 1. Change fields, and now you see the field flashing up here. Click it, one knob here. You get estimated time of arrival, and I don't know whether that's next fix or destination. I'm not sure. I've made one of the boxes on my 530 is the ETA at the destination, so I can just look at that when my wife asks me when are we going to be there. So that works. And we got May, we're seeing 430 watts, installing is 650. Yeah, all right. Yeah, you'll like that 650. If you can fit a 750 in there, you'll like that even better. And Thomas says, yeah, just buy a GFC 500. That's what we're going to do in my 182. The problem I have in my 182 is I don't have any pitch control now at all. So I'm going to have to add a pitch servo. And I also would really like to add automatic trim or electric trim. So that's 2 more servos I've got to add. And before I can do that, I've got to get a new control yoke that has an elevator trim connection in it. It's not a cheap modification, but I think it's going to be really nice. So it may be worth it. And let's see, any other chats we got here? Okay, yeah, Charles is talking about, yeah, there is a feature in there. I've heard that in the GTN's checklist feature is an extra add-on thing you have to pay money for. I'm not certain of that. Somebody told me that a little while back. Let's see. Justin's asking beginner pitfalls I should be aware of. Yeah, did you put a 530 in your command sheet, Justin? Some of the pitfalls are not using flight plans, I think, and just setting the pink line and going and not really taking advantage of the features. Biggest pitfall I always have is when I was new to it, I would push the cursor button to create the cursor and then type something in. And then I push the cursor again to make it go away. When you do that, that second push of that cursor is basically an undo button. So it would delete whatever waypoint I had added or whatever.
I still do that.
And I've finally gotten to where I don't do that most of the time now, almost all the time, but boy, it's frustrating. So I've gotten away from I use the cursor button to bring up the cursor and start editing. But when I'm done editing, I press the enter key or the clear key if I want to undo. Why am I unable to cut and paste these links? Beats me. Don't know the answer for you. Good job, Justin. And did you move it to East Coast yet, or is it still over in Compton, or is that where you're having the work done?
If you can't cut and paste the links, you can just go to the captainschiff.com and then click on presentations, and you'll see the GNS 101 on there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Discussion on RAIM and WAS. That's advanced stuff.
Yes. Well, the good news is the 530 and 430 WAS navigators will constantly do your RAIM checks for you. But if you want to do a RAIM check yourself, it's pretty simple to do. We're still on this 530 navigator here. If we come over here to the aux chapter or aux book, we're on page 1 right now. Let's move over here to page 2. You can see RAIM prediction. On the 430, it's the same process. I don't think it's on page 2. I think it's on some other page. So we give ourselves a cursor. We come down here to RAIM prediction and enter that menu. And it asks us to type in the waypoint that we're concerned about. And you can type this little thing and type in another waypoint. So let's say we're interested in the destination that we were playing with here today. I'll put Blythe in here. So we want to do a RAIM check for Blythe. And we want to do it for today. At time, let's say 0100 local. My airplane I have set up to be Zulu time, so this would be Zulu. You can set yours up the same way. So you press enter, it highlights compute RAIM, you press enter, and it goes off and does its RAIM check. And when it's done with the check, I don't think it works on a simulator, but you'll get a message down here that says RAIM check okay. And it's within this time, and I don't remember how much of a window you get. I don't want to even make a guess.
Is it required to check the RAIM if you're using like a WAS approach?
That's correct. It's because the WAS navigator continually does it for you. You're not required to do a RAIM check before departure, for instance. But if you have a non-WAS navigator, then you would be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you do a pre-flight in for flight, for instance, this is one I've been doing a lot lately. If you go over to flights, one of the possibility in that flights menu is a computer. When you look at the nav log, it will do a RAIM check for you, and it'll print right on the top of the nav log that your RAIM check is okay for this time frame. Yeah, but I have not flown with a GNC 355. I think I would be more inclined to put a 650 in there, a GTN 650 in there that includes a common nav radio. I like my boxes to do double duty, so not just a navigator, but also a communicator and a VOR, a terrestrial nav aid as well. Yeah, and Sebastian mentions about the RAIM not required unless WAS is not available. My suggestion would be if you're flying into, out of, or through an area that is subject to a GPS outage navigation NOTAM, it might be worth your while to make sure you have a RAIM check along your route of flight. And also make sure you've got some kind of terrestrial nav aid available. My technique is with a RAIM navigator, you can file both a destination and an alternate under IFR that have nothing but GPS approaches. But if I'm flying into an area where there's a GPS outage NOTAM, I will make sure I have a terrestrial approach in one of those, basically use the non-WAS navigator rules. That's just my technique, and there's no requirement for that, but I think it's a good idea. Yeah, there's a slight distinction between a RAIM check and a system integrity check. You're right, and we're kind of simplifying it for the purpose of discussion here. Yep, that is true. Installed the Flightstream 210 and the Cardinal RG with a 430W. Yep, I wish we'd done ours years ago. It's only about $1,000. It's easy for me to spend your money, isn't it? And let's see what else we got. Yeah, if you're buying a used unit, make sure you get one with WAS already installed. Garmin used to do an update from a non-WAS into a WAS unit. I don't think they're doing that anymore. And these things have been around almost 20 years now, and they do still support them with overhaul and maintenance and so forth. But eventually, one day, parts are going to become unavailable, and you're not going to be able to get any work done on these navigators. So the useful life will eventually go away. And that is all I see in the chat. Let me see if we got a Q&A here. I think I've answered everything in there, Brian.
Yeah, I think so too. And I smell dinner.
Me too.
Well, yeah, you need to go have your anniversary.
I do, yeah. You go reintroduce myself to my wife.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for another great lesson, Mike. It was very good.
You're welcome, Brian. I'm glad we were finally able to pull it off, and we'll get together and pick a date for the next two and close this series out so we can get cranking on a GTN series.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. That's a lot of new stuff that I know a lot of people are eager to learn more about. Yep,
you bet. So thanks everybody for coming tonight, and be sure to tell all your friends, point them to my YouTube channel and that playlist if you want, point them to Brian's website, and point them to the contribution links too.
Yeah, and those contributions aren't that agreed or anything like that. It's just Zoom platform is very expensive, and it helps us support that and keep this going.
Yep, and talks like this give us a reason to use it. So
absolutely. So thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Have a good night.